one of the beliefs I have is when you're ready to make that next leap, and it might be someone's on a corporate path and they're switching companies so they can accelerate their career velocity. It might be considering entrepreneurship, becoming a business owner, small business, VC-backed startup, like whatever the path is. I found it very useful to use what sometimes people use as their side hustle time. Maybe they have a job and I'm like, don't use the side hustle time if you truly have a next stop in your destination. Use that time to go validate, vet, and try to disprove some beliefs that you have. Because, for instance, in my world, a lot of times people want to build something. And you see this with business owners of all sorts. It could go all the way to a bakery or someone who's like always dreamed of having a sandwich shop. And when they actually run the bakery, they realize like, oh, I'm not really in the bakery business. I'm in the entry level, frontline
Right.
worker,
Frontline workers,
business.
exactly, right.
Right. And so figuring out like, what does it take me to get my first customer? Actually go do that. What is a day in the life? What are the things that are going to irritate me? And actually go kind of sample those things, prove it out. Many times with many businesses, on the entrepreneurship side, it is all about closing that customer. And so go figure out your sales muscle and don't think that you're going to be able to just make the thing like you do as the employee. Actually go get that. And on the flip side, if you're looking to go take another role, I've had folks who said, hey, LaSean, I really want to get into product management. And, for folks listening, that's a role pretty common in technology where you're kind of like the CEO of a given product. And trying to figure out, why does the customer want this? What do they want? How do we evolve the roadmap and the features of a given product so they will continue to buy? And people say, well, no one will give me a shot at that job. And I'm like, okay, could you time box this and take a 90-day, 30-day project? There's someone out there who needs a product manager where instead of driving Uber or doing something on the side to make a little extra money, if you have a full-time job, use that extra capacity to kind of get to your next step and kind of validate it. And so whether it's kind of building up your portfolio on the side or it's de-risking your business idea to figure out if somebody will actually pay for the thing you're dreaming up, I think these are ways to really look at opportunities through a lens that like removes that risk. And so they
Sure.
become calculated risks because you've kind of done some of the validation and really your current employer is kind of subsidizing your experimentation. And so I think, in most cases, there's probably something people could do to get them closer to their dream in their current role without just like, I quit. And then, now they're sitting in the room for a year trying to figure out like, oh, I probably should have done these other things before I quit this job.
Again, back to doing your research and doing the upfront work and not just, taking it on a whim and hoping it works out, but really kind of understanding what you're giving up and then what you potentially may gain from that risk. No, I agree.
And just quickly, I'll add there is, from my personal journey, when I think about leadership, it's not just, again, kind of motivating the folks, developing the talent, setting the vision, but it's also saying, I guess part of this is vision. Where are we headed? And part of what I've spent my career trying to do is to say, what is next, right? So whether it's been web or cloud or mobile, I spent some time in mixed reality, kind of the social layer that then layered on top of the consumer web. Like at all these inflection points, what I love about those is if you have the right conviction and your industry, you understand the customer pain points, and you can see where something's going. When you show up to the new place, guess what? No one else is an expert. Like it's the new thing, right? And when you show up at the new thing, there's a leadership opportunity that almost gets invented because somebody has to take that new segment, category, industry to its full potential. And so I also feel like there's opportunities to go down traditional paths, and those can be great. If you want to be a physician or something, you're not going to freestyle that. But if you're on a path where there's we don't know what's next, it's a new industry, and it's not just technology. There are all sorts of areas where like business is changing. And so I just love those reminders, because those are areas where there's no glass ceiling, because there's nobody in front of you. The whole thing is new. And so your kind of runway for leadership is really only limited by, the effort you put in.
That's a great point. And I think, that point around taking those chances, persevering and pushing through those decisions as well. And then not seeing a glass ceiling, or not having that be a limiting factor, and saying,
Yeah.
like to your point before, if you're doing things on the side rather than driving for Uber, maybe, like I said, you're researching a new product design, or you're trying to get a better understanding of how AI is going to affect whatever career, whatever function you happen to be in, but learning along the way, it's going to make you better in that role. I want to talk a little bit about, and you mentioned this several times, the word opportunity, right? And one of the things that I see, honestly, in my own recruiting experiences over the last 26 years, I'm sure you've seen as well with the big companies you work for, is the lack of opportunity among a more diverse workforce. And I think your point earlier on about, looking at non-traditional candidates is a great example, and a great way that can be improved. But we all talk about, the mentors that we had, and the opportunity that we had to intern under somebody, or look at someone as an example of where we want to get to in technology, and across the board by technology as well. There's not a lot of diversity around the leadership suite. So I'm curious about, did that drive you, looking to become a diverse leader that you could then be an example down the road, right? Did that drive you? Did that cause you to have any caution along the way? Just being now an owner, a founder, an entrepreneur, being in tech space, being a Black, diverse, well-educated, well-experienced individual. How do you look at that now as the leader that you are?
Well, I'll try to be concise on this, because like we could take that
I know
so
it's a
many
really
different
big
directions.
question, I realize, but I just,
Yeah. Yeah,
leadership
no, but it's a great one
yeah.
though. And so Ken, where I would start there is more of a philosophical question for anyone, and then I'll put myself in the path that I chose. For folks who have read Naval Ravikant's Almanac, or any of his kind of readings, he has this common theme that I've kind of adopted, because it kind of speaks of kind of a more stoic way to live and work. And he says no one should chase the status game, because it's zero sum. And if you look at other ways to play whatever game that you're talking about, they can be win-win. And by status, what are examples of status games? Many times politics can be a status game, government politics, but also corporate politics, right? If I become the CVP of this team, then this guy doesn't get to be the CVP, right? Like there's a sense of scarcity in a lot of what's up for grabs, right? If this person gets the headline, then she doesn't get the headline. Like, there's all
Sure.
sorts of ways to kind of think about this.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that's such an important conversation to start is, for me, I focus on freedom over status. And that's freedom of my calendar. That's freedom. I just want to be able to move how I want to move. And through that lens, while there are many barriers we can discuss, very few folks have control over me. But if you want to play the status game, and I'm not here to judge if someone wants to play, I'm not saying status is a pejorative. Like, if
Sure,
someone wants to
sure.
play that game, just realize those headwinds are going to create a number of systemic issues that are out of your control. And so the frustration that we hear when people are marching or writing letters, or, on panels discussing, how could we solve these things? They're also kind of talking about some of these systemic issues that the folks in power are actually not incentivized to go and change, right?
Sure, sure, right. There's a
And
reason why
so
it's been that way for so long.
exactly. And
Mm.
so one of the reasons I spend a fair amount of my time today figuring out how to empower bootstrap founders is, I believe that's one of the best ways for folks to really take control. And so if someone's says, hey, in the Fortune 500 companies, the board of directors and the C-suite only have X% of representation of insert metric or demographic that you're tracking, you're now saying like, okay, we have to tackle this in a way that is going to try to, go and fight all these headwinds versus is there someone who can build, maybe what starts as a small business and they get to, something meaningful where they start hiring and now they have full autonomy. And so, when I look at this, at first I ask like, well, what game do you want to play? And if you want to play, the game that comes with status and you're like, I want to be the C-suite for a publicly traded company that's doing innovative things. And I want all the, the trappings and the compensation that comes with it. I struggle to say, here's the silver bullet where we can balance that out because no one who has power there is deeply incentivized to kind of give up their seat at the table.
Right.
And so anyway, I'm not saying like everyone should, kind of rush out and be small business owners. But my point there is like, even in the startup world, we know that there are fewer people of color, there are fewer women who get the investment, even though they have, the qualifications. And I think if we start thinking about what can we control, there's just a lot more that we can do there. And kind of bringing it back to my story, one of the reasons I gravitated toward, kind of coding was it was very clear, did I do it or did I not? Right.
Right.
And, it's like the program works, it passes the test. It's very easy to evaluate. It's not like
no pun intended, but it's very binary. I mean, it literally is.
It is.
Either you did it or it didn't. The program works or it doesn't matter who you are doing the coding.
Yeah, I had this moment later in my career. I was in an executive position, and I was a junior exec, and I was at someone's house. Very nice house. At the time I was like living in some condo, and I'm just like, goodness, this is how the folks are actually living. And we were in their wine cellar. House on a golf course. I mean, this is just like, really nice place.
The fact that they even had a wine cellar tells you everything.
Exactly. Not a wine closet. This is actually a room. And so we're in the wine cellar, and this guy that I knew from work, this was all a bunch of us who were working. He leans over to me at some point and he said, LaSean, you made it. And it really rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah, sure.
Like it felt very, very icky. Because up to that point, I was telling myself, well, I write the best code. I hire the best people. I was trying to do all these things that could be measured. And I had to acknowledge I'd gotten to this point where there were these intangibles and, biases were being introduced and all sorts of things were, potentially outside, or not potentially, were outside of my control.
Yeah, right.
And it just didn't seem fair. Right. And so kind of at the core of your question, I really struggle how to tackle that question if folks are chasing the status game.
Right.
But if you're really, chasing financial independence or you're chasing, freedom or something else, I think there are many ways. And part of it is kind of, I think my journey as an anecdote or an example is you take the non-traditional path, you make it undeniable. And then if you choose to go the more traditional path, you kind of eliminated those headwinds because at the core, what I believe, and this is, I haven't read a great paper on this. This is just my years of experience. There are some bad actors in the system. Like there are some mean people, there are people who are trying to, but I actually don't think that's what is typically going on. I think mostly people are selfish and they are trying to preserve their position. And they don't want to get fired by hiring someone or promoting someone or investing in someone who is going to penalize them somewhere down the future. And all of their biases and others are like looking for heuristics and rules of thumbs on how to protect their position. And through that lens, it's a lot easier for me to, look at a company, organization, an executive, and say, how do I handle this person? working in big corporate environments, I'm sure you have other guests who can tell you these types of stories. The politics in big corporate, organizations are crazy. And I told this woman I work with, she was like, LaShawn, yeah, I'd love some feedback on kind of, working with me and other types of things. And I said, listen, you're highly intelligent, you're extremely driven, and I think you would stab me in the back of the alley if you had to. And I was trying to be like super honest with her. And I
Yeah,
was just
sure.
like,
Wow.
and she was like, we had a really long conversation about it afterwards. And it was really interesting. Her take was very human. She was like, oh, those things you're describing, those characteristics are how I survive.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Sure. She's
it's
had
kind
to
of
all
like
these
you kind
years.
of corner an animal in a wall. She's like, that's how I survive.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't know how much of this dysfunction is just all of us humans trying to navigate our way and preserve our position.
Right.
But I do think there's different games we can play that give us more control.
That's great. Well, and I love how you reframed it by saying, freedom over status quo. Freedom over status. That's a great way to reframe it. And then you're also reframing in a way where now you're put back in control. Like you
Yeah.
said, if you're going that traditional route, that's great and it's good for a lot of people. Just be aware that there's a lot of headwinds that are in, like you said, that are systemic. They're around for a long, long time. It's not impossible to overcome, but it's going to be really difficult. Whereas
Yeah.
if you focus on the freedom side, that's something very, very separate. I want to touch on, and you mentioned AI a couple of times a little while ago, and whether from a leadership perspective, is AI going to enhance? Is it going to hurt us? Is it going to replace some of us? I read an article in the Wall Street Journal, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. It was an example of a call center, and they were talking about a lot of call center reps that were saying that they are being quote unquote managed, right, by AI. And the AI is literally physically in their ear telling them what prompt to use, what to tell the customer on the phone, how to upsell, how to cross sell, those kinds of things. And they felt like their manager, right, was not a human, it's an AI. And back to your point, trusting that, right, trusting that they're it's doing the right thing. So I'm curious about your take on, especially in the media world and social media and the areas that you focus on. Do you see AI having an impact on leadership, how we lead, and also, making us better leaders along the way, hopefully?
Yeah. So the first piece, when and I spent a decent amount of time trying to think about both the opportunity and the responsibility portions of AI. And there are the ethics of AI, and I have friends who work in that space to make sure it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. It's trained on the right data set, and we'll put that to the side. But more fundamental is, I don't feel many folks in technology are coming from the right place of empathy for people in other industries, because of a very simple thing that I think is potentially non-obvious to many people in technology. If you work in tech, it doesn't matter if you have, you went to some fancy school, you're expert in some topic. To survive, you're effectively relearning your whole career every 2 to 4 years. So you could be 50 something years old and you could say, like, I've had to reboot so many times. And the idea that your job's never safe and the skills that I have to always be refreshed. I'm always upskilling. I'm always reskilling.
Right.
That's just built into the DNA of the industry. And there are many industries where that cycle might be decades. And so someone potentially could go through their whole career and not really have to, kind of build a whole new set of skills to survive. And that anxiety that I'm observing from certain individuals, certain industries, it's the first time they've ever had to come to that realization that you're going to have to reinvent yourself at a
Sure.
much faster pace. And so, again, I think that's an empathy situation where it's just like we have to empathize that there are certain folks who that's not normal to change that often. At the same time, I don't think they have a choice, right? So I don't think we can like stop or slow down, the change because customers will want higher production movies or they will want cheaper delivery food. Like the customer will at some point want the benefits of these things. And so I don't think the genie can go back in the bottle. But anyway, that's where I would start, is that we're now in a world where everyone's position is going to require upskilling at a much faster pace. And so leaders need to figure out how they are going to, number one, invest in their people to navigate that. And then number two, and this is where that duality of a great manager comes in, you got to figure out how you can flex your teams. And so I think that'll mean more contract workers, because if the demand cycle is moving, you can't say I have 400 employees and that's it. You might say I have 175 employees and then I have 400 contractors. And
right.
And again, I know, like, even saying that, it's like, well, how do those contractors get benefits? And like, every one of these is a hot button issue, right?
Sure, right. It's not straightforward.
But the resiliency of the organization, I believe, is going to be smaller organizations with better trained or better training systems to kind of help the employees kind of adapt as things are changing. And so that's, I think, number two. And then finally, as we, you talked about kind of, AI is the manager in some cases. I have this thing I've been talking to folks about, call it just like disappearing middle. And I've been observing this in almost every industry, that the biggest companies are getting bigger and there's more opportunities than ever for very small companies. And the middle-sized business they just can't compete, because to go up market, they are competing against folks who are very well capitalized, and then to go down market, they basically have to contract, and they become a different type of business. Similarly, I believe organizations are going to get much flatter, and they're hierarchical, they're matrix. There's all sorts of organizational design that different companies kind of put in place. But any company that has a very top-down hierarchical system, I think is going to be challenged. And if we look at that org design, a lot of that came from the military back in the 1800s, and then the industrialization, the Industrial Revolution. They kind of pulled. They're like, we need a way to organize these factories.
What framework do we use? How about the military?
So they just pulled it from the military. Like, it's a horrible way to manage people in the first place for a corporation. And so, because of that, all these layers have been created, because we don't know how to efficiently communicate. Some companies have a lot of meeting culture. Like, all of these inefficiencies that we could go down tangents about, are because there's so many humans stacked on top of each other. And so, similar to how I believe many of these middle-sized companies are going to disappear, the idea of middle management, not quite disappear, but it is going to collapse and compress. And the idea of, your folks are probably, your audience, familiar with span of control. How many directs do you have? I've worked at places where if you have too few, then you're in trouble. If you have too many, it's a flag. But for me, it's been typically about, somewhere between 6 to 10 people is where, directs is where I'm at the right pace. And, thinking about all the one-on-ones you have to have and all the other performance reviews, when it starts hitting 12, 13, 14, like, it can start to feel overwhelming in, a more administrative type of company. And I look at all of that and say, I see a future where a middle manager could have 100 directs, because they're going to have this AI assistant. And the idea of like, oh my goodness, I have to spend 4 hours writing this performance review. No, you're going to spend 15 or 20 minutes, because all the data is going to get pulled. All of the flags are going to be, acknowledged. A lot of the data that today is horrible for these, kind of quarterly, annual performance reviews of like, well, what did she do? What did he do? Are we doing stack ranking? That's going to be a lot more objective. It's just going to go look at communication patterns, different results, and it's going to say, here's what we believe is the right shape of your performance this period. And then somebody will look at that and kind of move things around and kind of adjust. And so when I look at the volume of kind of employees that one person can manage today, I think AI is going to 10x that easily. And as a result, we're going to see much flatter organizations. And so when I think about AI, I think I'm spending less time thinking about how's it going to change architecture or oil and gas or, the interview process or whatever. And I'm thinking more business ops. Like, what's your rhythm of business, and how is your rhythm of business going to change because of the inefficiency that's going to get removed from your organization? And that is going to reshape, I also think, the types of folks who are going to be the best managers, because then it's going to be, the administrative stuff is going to be abstracted, and it's, I believe, the person who can go in that one-on-one. I've had many people who are crying in a one-on-one because they're like, some problem or this person or whatever. And I think you're just going to be spending more of your time doing that, to kind of coach, motivate, incentivize, and get people to where they can really reach their full potential. And you're not going to be filling out a bunch of forms. So that's a long-winded answer, but it's like so deep in there. There's a lot of directions we could take.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, being the human part, the human component of a leader, of a manager.
Yeah,
and like you
exactly.
said, not the bureaucratic, all that other crap that takes up your time. It has to. It's just part of the job, like it or not. But if AI can take over at least even a portion of that and allow humans to be more human and more empathetic, it's going to require a different kind of leader, a different kind of empathy. The whole term and fad around EQ, right? That's going to become more and more important, and HR is going to have to evolve as well. And I think it's a really interesting thought about what a company looks like 20 years from now, with the addition of AI to help these leaders become better human leaders. I think it's a fantastic topic for sure. Well, I mean, there's a lot more that I would love to touch on, but I want to be respectful of your time also. There's probably a number of folks in our audience today, whether they're HR folks or CEOs or even aspiring small business owners, that would love to probably hear more from you, maybe pick your brain a little bit. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you and learn more about what you're doing at CAGR, but also, kind of your take on leadership?
Yeah, two things. First off, if you want to reach out over email, it's grow, GROW at CAGR.com. I don't give my email out afraid, I'm going to get too many responses. What I find is that most people don't follow through. And so I'm happy to make time. And if you just want to talk about any of these topics, you can very easily find me on LinkedIn, LaSean Smith, all one string of text, and Twitter at LaSean, LaSean. Again, for me, the reason I love these conversations, Ken, is it reminds me of steps along my journey that I need to bring back. It sparks ideas. You share ideas with me, and I'm thinking that's great. But also, and this is very important for, hopefully your audience, is I'm in the business of helping other businesses, right? So I don't have a course to sell. I don't have a consulting business, per se, to sell. I look for problems that, fairly young companies have. I try to solve them usually through software. And by making time to speak with folks in groups, one-on-one, chatting with folks on social media, that's how I collect signal on what problems to go and chase and solve. And so I don't want to come off like I'm just here being altruistic. I use these conversations and the relationships that I build to go figure out what is stopping folks from, having their business become more successful. And is there a way through audience and automation that I can go contribute to that? And so anyone who wants to reach out on any of those channels, I'm here, I'm around, happy to make time.
Thank you. I really appreciate that willingness to share and make yourself available. Also, I know our audience is going to follow through. You'd be surprised how many folks that I get that contact me having heard me on another podcast or interviewing someone like yourself. So I really do appreciate that. Well, thank you for your time today. It's been a great discussion. There's a lot of different pieces that we touched on, but it's been eye-opening for me as well. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on leadership.
Fantastic, Ken. Take care.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye-bye.